What do you think can happen in the world that will really trigger Western investors coming back into precious metals?
I think the cost of living crisis continuing to get more severe as people start to understand that the value of the dollars they hold are not maintaining their purchasing power over time. I think that's kind of the big impetus for what could drive people into physical metals.
Do you think they're going to create some type of event prior to introducing the central bank digital currency system, whether it be a cyber attack or whatnot? I mean, how do you see this all playing out? Or is this 10 years down the road, or is this something that's going to happen in the next couple of years?
Is it right around the corner? I don't think so. I think there's a very good chance they will.
Where's the end game here? I'm really confused as to how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we need a complete collapse of the political system to make any sort of positive change. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about.
What is that new currency that we're going to be moving to?
We already saw in Canada how easily and readily those banks froze people's assets at the behest of the Canadian government.
Where do you see the economy going forward in North America? Maybe touch on Europe a little bit as well.
In the US, as well as in Europe, in the EU, a lot of these government bonds are hitting yields not seen since the great financial crisis or the Eurozone debt crisis.
All right, let's do it. All right, well, today I'd like to welcome special guest Jesse Day from Commodity Culture. Jesse, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
It's an honor to be here, Michael. Looking very much forward to the conversation.
Appreciate it. I've been watching your show for many years now, and you get some amazing guests, and I've been listening to those precious metals experts speak for many years, some of them over 10 years. So I really appreciate all that you've done in the precious metals community and kind of getting that word out there to get people involved in precious metals, because I know it's such a quiet investment option in North America right now. So great job on everything you do. And why don't I just ask you to first off, who's your number one favorite guest on your show that you've ever had on?
That's a really tough one to single out, but I have to say that I always enjoy speaking with Rick Rule and Lobo Tigre. Those are two of the investors in the natural resources sector who both have really excellent and in-depth knowledge when it comes to sound money principles and the understanding of gold and silver as a monetary asset, but they also have incredible insight into the mining space in terms of mining equities, and they're very balanced in their approach. So they're not promotional. You never get any hyperbole from them. When they think there's potential risks, they'll tell you what the risks are. And so I always appreciate hearing from both of them. So I'm going to cheat and say two people. That's Rick and Lobo.
No, that's great. Yeah, Rick's fascinating to listen to. I've been listening to him for so many years now. And I mean, when it comes to investing in precious metals, are you mostly in the mining sectors? Is that kind of where you park your money?
Yes, the majority of my capital when it comes to precious metals is in equities. I'm also obviously a holder of physical gold and silver bullion. I believe that's the foundation that everybody should have first and foremost, not only before they speculate in the mining stocks, but before they speculate in the stock market, period. It's interesting, and as you mentioned, it's a bit of a quiet investment space, gold and silver. And when my friends come to me and know that I have a show and they ask, okay, what should I invest in? Which I don't give out financial advice, but the first question I always ask is, do you own any physical gold and silver? And the answer is always no. And I tell them why they should own it. And it's tough for a lot of people to wrap their heads around the fact that it's not an investment that you hope is going to go up over time. It's an insurance policy. And primarily, it's a way to remove a portion of your wealth from counterparty risk. That's the main function that I see gold and silver serving. Because if you ask anybody, do you want 100% of your wealth to be in a bank account with a broker, with some custodian, with some sort of counterparty risk involved? I mean, even if you're storing cash under the mattress, the government that issued that cash is still a counterparty in a way, because it's only through the full faith in those paper IOUs that money is going to retain value. And of course, we know that it's being debased rapidly, fiat currencies across the board. So I see it primarily as a way to store wealth outside the system. And that's why I believe in having bullion as kind of the foundation. But definitely speculating on the mining sector is something that I would say the majority of my capital when it comes to gold and silver is parked there.
Sure. Now, the mining sector hasn't really kept up with the actual price increases in the gold and silver over the past several years. Do you think that you're going to see a major rush and a big move in the mining sector when it comes to gold and silver over the next few months and years?
I think there's a big disconnect, and that disconnect has been apparent for a few years now. I mean, if we look at the GDX ETF and the SIL ETF as proxies for the gold and silver mining space, respectively, they've barely outperformed the metals. I mean, we're talking 5 percentage points, 10 percentage points, maybe. If we look year to date, for example, this is a little bit insane. And I think there's a number of reasons why, but the broader investment community, I think, and even when it comes to institutional investors, I don't think a lot of them are closely watching the gold and especially not the silver mining space at this point in time. And so I think eventually, as people realize that higher precious metals prices are here to stay, because I think there's some worry there as well. And particularly as more recently we've seen with the war in Iran, metals selling off when it looks like the war is going to continue and kind of rallying when it looks like peace is on the table. So I think people are a little bit hesitant at this point in time when it comes to the miners. But we look at companies like Agnico Eagle, Newmont, they're reporting incredible earnings from these high precious metals prices. And I think there's also some concern that perhaps those earnings can't continue into the future, because I think there still are a lot of people expecting a drop in the gold and silver price, which I would just see as a buying opportunity. But there's a disconnect there. You know, I spoke to Peter Schiff about this at one point, and he said that investors were climbing a wall of worry when it comes to the gold and silver mining equities in particular. So people are very hesitant to pull the trigger to buy and very fast to pull the trigger to sell when they see potential downside risk ahead. But I would say over a 2 to 5 year time frame, I believe that if one has patience and selects the right companies, then there's tremendous opportunity ahead. I'm not sure whether that's going to be, a parabolic style spike once people recognize the value there, if it will be more of a slow, gradual trend upwards. But my whole thing is I don't worry too much about the price at which I buy something if the valuation looks attractive. I'm a long-term investor, so I'm not watching RSI or these different indicators to try and time my entries. I just think if you're looking at the big producers, the ETFs, that's kind of where I stick to. And if you have a long-term time horizon, then I think you'll do very well.
Yeah, same. You mentioned the Western retail investors are still not really heavily invested in precious metals. What do you think is going to get them to FOMO in? What do you think is going to get them to FOMO in? The FOMO coming was when the prices kept going higher and higher and higher, making new all-time highs every week. And we saw the FOMO rush come in, and it was crazy. And now, though, the last 2 to 3 months, it's really quieted down. There's more people are selling their gold and silver versus buying, which we haven't seen in quite some time. So what do you think is going to drive outside of the price going up? Because obviously the FOMO is going to always bring in retail investors, but outside of the FOMO, what do you think can happen in the world that will really trigger a new the Western investors coming back into precious metals?
I think the cost of living crisis continuing to get more severe as people start to understand that the value of the dollars they hold are not maintaining their purchasing power over time. I think that's kind of the big impetus for what could drive people into physical metals. Again, as I mentioned, storing your wealth outside of counterparty risk is one thing. Perhaps we could see, as governments look like they'll eventually be trying to roll out central bank digital currencies and move in that direction of greater capital controls. I think that could also potentially drive some people in. But for your average person on the street, I think it could be a realization of the erosion of their purchasing power and really why it's happening. Now, a lot of people, one could say most people are still in the dark in terms of the causes of inflation. And most people believe there's some sort of political fix to it. Or I can vote for this politician who's saying he's going to bring the cost of living down somehow. Meanwhile, government debt and deficits balloon out of control. And it's kind of like, don't look over there. Don't worry. I'm going to take care of you. And these messages aren't true. And I think that could also be an impetus, is just more and more of a loss of confidence and faith in the political class, because we've got to be getting close to a point now where people realize there's nobody else to save us. There's no politician left to save us. And whatever you think about, Donald Trump or Mark Carney, I think the fact has become apparent. I mean, Trump was kind of that guy. I won't get too political here, don't worry. But Trump was kind of that guy he was the savior who was supposed to come in, drain the swamp, make America great again, do all these things, no more wars. And it's just turned out to be the exact opposite. And so if that doesn't wake people up, I mean, there will come a time when loss of confidence in the political class will cause some amount of people to then want to diversify their assets into the metals. But I think largely for Joe Sixpack, you're correct in that it's kind of chasing returns. To get your average person out there to fundamentally understand why precious metals are more of a life raft and not a rocket ship, it's tough to do. So I think we will see much higher prices. I think we will see that FOMO at some point. But for those who can grasp the gravity of the situation when it comes to currency debasement and just political corruption being so rampant, I think that will drive that subsector of people who wake up into metals as well.
Awesome. Now, you mentioned central bank digital currencies, and I do think that eventually when we head that way, I think that will be a driver to move people into metals and also crypto as well. Where and when do you think that is going to start happening? I mean, the $1 million question, right? And people have been talking about central bank digital currency for some time now. It's my guess that the technology is already there and set in place. It's a matter of just hitting the button and going live with it, or creating some type. Do you think they're going to create some type of event prior to introducing the central bank digital currency system, whether it be a cyber attack or whatnot? I mean, how do you see this all playing out? Or is this 10 years down the road, or is this something that's going to happen in the next couple of years?
I think it's probably sometime within the next decade where we will perhaps see attempts to roll out some type of CBDC. I don't think it will be universally launched all at once. A lot of jurisdictions around the world, it's very difficult to. I'll tell you, where I am in Serbia right now, it would be impossible. It's just decades away. The infrastructure is so poor here in terms of banking and stuff like that, and also people just wouldn't accept it. And so it has to be tried in jurisdictions where the population will be more willing. I think Canada is one of the places that would be the absolute best to test this out, simply because the Canadian population has shown they're very willing to do whatever the government tells them, at least enough people. Because if 40% of people go along with it and 20 to 30%, decide to just, that they're not for or against, but they go along to get along, and then the remainder is kind of in a minority at that point. So that kind of creates pressure. And once adoption starts to reach that certain tipping point, you kind of have to use it to interact day to day. I think that's the ultimate goal. Now, Canada is also currently trying to push through these surveillance/combating online hate bills, which I fully expect to pass. So that also kind of creates an environment which is very ripe for launching this sort of trackable digital currency. The UK is another country that's very much already headed in that Orwellian direction. Germany is another one. Australia as well. Israel, I think, would be a place that could also be a potential for launching something like that. So I think it bears, keeping one's eyes on it. Is it right around the corner? I don't think so. I think there's a very good chance they will engineer some sort of crisis, whether that's a false flag, whether that's a, cyber attack of some kind, to help usher people into it. I think they realize they can't suddenly implement it, so they're playing the long game. And I think you're probably correct in that the technology already exists to be able to turn this thing on, but they really need, a bit more of I don't know whether you want to call it a scare or something that's going to cause fear enough that people will move to this, or desperation. As I mentioned, the cost of living crisis, and Canada's a poster child for that. Things are getting unaffordable for a lot of people. And so if there was a way that they could ratchet up the cost of living crisis, let inflation run, and then when it gets to the point where people are really desperate, say, okay, we have a solution. Of course, it's not us. It's the greedy grocery store owners and these business owners who are gouging you. How dare they? We're going to, release a currency. We're going to potentially create a store, online grocery stores where you can use your government digital currency, and we're going to give you cheaper prices. They'll find some way to on-ramp people subtly at first and in a way that makes it seem like a good deal. I also don't think that they will ultimately shut off the other currency. I think they'll probably, here's your central bank digital currency. This is for particular special circumstances, whether that's, tax rebates, whether that's government assistance for certain people. You get your digital wallet, and that's where you'll get your central bank digital currency. You can use it for certain goods and services. And then I think they'll slowly try to ratchet it up from there and potentially make it universal at some point. But everybody's got to keep their eyes on this. Everybody's got to keep their eyes on this.
Yeah, it doesn't get talked about much. I mean, at least in Canada, and I know it's on the Central Bank of Canada's website already about the CBDC. So, I mean, it's definitely ready to go. It's just a matter of when. And I've talked to some high up people on the compliance side in Canada, and they said it's a certainty that it's going to be going live in Canada. It's just a matter of when. And so I think you're right about Canada being one of the first countries. But I guess where do we go from here? Like, this isn't going to make anything better. The fiat situation, the debt, everything's just going to get worse and worse. The dollar's just going to completely evaporate to inflation. So how do we, are we ever going to go back to a gold standard? I mean, are we going to move to this central bank digital currency system that just gets it even worse? Or is that their plan, to move it to there and collapse the currency on that system and then go to a gold back system? Like, where's the end game here? I'm really confused as to how this is all going to play out.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think we need a complete collapse of the political system to make any sort of positive change. And that's something that a lot of people don't talk about. People talk about voting in a different party or voting in a different particular political candidate, but they don't talk about the whole system needs to be destroyed. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. Because the political class and the bureaucracy behind them have become bloated to such an incredible extent in most countries that uprooting that and making any change is practically impossible, because you need too many people to sign off on it. And these people all have their own agendas. And of course, if you want to ascribe to what some would say are conspiracy theories, but I think is probably closer to the truth, there are power brokers behind the politicians who are actually making the decisions. And so getting to those people and getting them to, you kind of have to get them to sign off on a return to sound money, which would be impossible because
Right.
their entire grasp on power is based on this debt creation system. So for us to return to a gold standard would potentially take violent revolution in many countries. And I think in most countries, that's not a possibility. Certainly a place like Canada, there will not be a revolution. I mean, it all depends, because if a society goes through decades of pain and deprivation, they can be brought to a tipping point. We saw that happen in Argentina with the election of Javier Milei. Milei was almost like a Maxime Bernier type figure in Argentina, right? And Maxime Bernier stands no chance of ever winning an election in his lifetime in Canada, I don't think. In 30 to 50 years, I think a Max Bernier type character could pop up, as Millet did, and start talking about some of these radical ideas that Max has and potentially get elected on that platform. But then the question remains, the same power brokers are still behind the scenes. Yeah. So generally what happens with those type of candidates is they're given, they basically move the system in the same direction it was always going in, but they do it wearing a different mask. This is the mask of we're anti-establishment, we're making the government smaller, but there's always going to be an agenda continued to be pushed behind the scenes. So I don't have a really easy answer. It's just I do believe we are potentially in a fourth turning type scenario right now. And so my kind of angle on things. It's why I live in Serbia. It's why I believe in being multi-jurisdictional, having a plan B, having other places, a residence permit in a place outside of your country of citizenship, and diversifying your banking so you have assets in banks in different jurisdictions, because we're entering a time of severe uncertainty geopolitically. So I think the most important thing is for people to protect themselves from that potential risk.
So do you think the Western banking system is at major risk and that could go down, and that the central banks in for example, North America can actually go down, or in Europe? I mean, do you see that as an actual possibility? And then what would replace that? Is it just a new central banking system that we trust again, or like how do we move away from the central banks? Is, I guess, the question I've always asked, and is really, and I know you mentioned a revolution. But how do we go to that new currency? Is it gold backs? Is it Bitcoin? Is it what is that new currency that we're going to be moving to?
Yeah, interesting question about central banks, because as we know, in Canada, the banking system has already been massively consolidated to a few mega banks. That's it, right?
Right.
In the US, you still have hundreds or thousands of regional banks. So in Canada, it's already been monopolized, or I don't know what you want to call it, but I think it would, again, we're in a situation where it's now easier to connect the banks, the legacy banking system, to potentially the Bank of Canada. Perhaps that's the route where you're not necessarily going to collapse or destroy the banking system. You're simply going to co-opt it because you only have a few players in the game. And we already saw in Canada how easily and readily those banks froze people's assets at the behest of the Canadian government during the Freedom Convoy. So they're already on board for whatever. Whatever the government says, they're all on board. So I think in Canada, you don't even need a collapse of the banking system. You can co-opt them. I think in America, they are potentially, there is potentially an agenda to bring the regional banking system to an end and consolidate, as is happening in Canada. Ultimately, there could be a path to having, people have talked about Fed coin or some sort of central bank digital currency issued directly by the Federal Reserve, and you have your Fed wallet and you kind of transact that way. So that could be something that's coming. In terms of what could be, at the end of all of this, when potentially we do see some kind of revolution or some sort of change in the system, I find that gold on the blockchain is an interesting method of potentially transacting, because we can't be walking around with gold and silver coins in our pockets to make transactions. I mean, anything's possible. I'm not ruling that out, but I think a sort of gold and silver backed digital currency could potentially be one route. I think Bitcoin's very interesting. It's still a very speculative asset, and it's still such a young asset, so it's so difficult to know. It has a lot of the characteristics and properties, some would say all of them, to make kind of an ideal sound money, except it's extraordinarily volatile in both directions. So that whole kind of maintaining the value, maintaining it as a store, I wouldn't call it a store of value at this point in time.
Right.
Now some would say, oh, well, if you go back to the inception of Bitcoin until today, it's like up hundreds of thousands of percent or something ridiculous like that. Yes, but along the way, extreme volatility either way. So it doesn't really work at present as a currency that you can transact with day to day.
Sure.
That might change. But in terms of what will bring us there, yeah, it's kind of like what I laid out earlier. We just need to see enough pain be felt by the general population for any sort of real change to occur. Unfortunately, they're trying to build this sort of system now where it becomes a digital prison. And so the idea is to set it up so that even if you want to opt out, there is no pathway to doing so. So that's kind of the race against time that I believe we're in. And ultimately, that digital control system, I believe, will eventually fail, but that could then take decades.
Right.
So it's a matter of, like I said, protecting yourself, protecting your family, doing what you can, making sure you have access to sound money, making sure you have access to other places around the world where this sort of agenda is either not happening at all, or is that there's things in its way, or it's moving forward at a much slower pace. And then you can kind of it's obviously it's not possible for everyone, but I think that should be the ultimate goal for people who do see what's coming.
Absolutely. I think most people at this point they're stuck in their money in the banks and in stocks, and if those don't perform well, they're screwed. Or their home, right? The real estate that they own in their country, which they're already starting to see them lose value. I think we're down 15 to 25% here in Canada. I know the rest of the world is seeing similar things. I mean, what's the pulse out in Europe when it comes to real estate and the economy in general? I know here people are struggling. Like the inflation in Canada is so significant that a lot of people don't have any spare money to go on vacation or even pay their bills for that matter, especially not to invest in things like gold and silver. So I mean, and I only think it's going to get worse. I only see that getting much worse. I don't see the economy getting any better. I see that all the economic indicators to me are saying that things are going to continue to slow down. Real estate's going to continue to slow down, which is going to drive the prices of everything to come down. Now I know they print money and they set asset prices to whatever they want, but at the end of the day, at some point they got to be planning to collapse even the financial systems, the stock market, the real estate market. When does that happen? I know a lot of people are speculating on 2026 or 2027, based off of the overvaluations of the stock market today and where the economy is at, and having to potentially raise interest rates based off of this new inflation. So, where do you see the economy going forward in North America? Maybe touch on Europe a little bit as well.
Yeah. So I can only report from my own observations, which is here in Serbia, spent some time recently in the Czech Republic as well as Hungary. At the moment, for here in Serbia, things are much more affordable, but of course, the average wage is much lower than in the West. Inflation has definitely taken its toll. Things are getting more expensive. So people are absolutely feeling the squeeze here. Now, the thing about Serbia, which is fortunate, there's a lot of domestically sourced food. So vegetables and produce is so affordable even for people here. Prices are very cheap on those sorts of staples. Bread as well, very, very cheap and affordable. So you have a bit of a buffer in that sense. And the other interesting thing that gives a buffer to this part of the world, particularly in the aftermath of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, is approximately, I believe it's 70 to 80% of the electricity generated in Serbia comes from domestically mined lignite coal. Now, the disadvantage to that is that that's the dirtiest coal imaginable. In some cities here in the winter, you're just constantly in the danger zone on your air quality app. So you have to be mindful of that stuff. And so there's a downside to it as well, but you have a little bit of that energy security. And you have that food security, which makes it kind of a good place to be overall in the face of what's coming. I found Hungary to be fairly affordable as well compared to the mainstream EU cities, the capital cities. And Czech Republic was expensive. I'll say that things have also gotten very expensive there. It's hard to get a read from the locals in those countries in terms of how things are going. I haven't had any in-depth discussions, but obviously this inflation is putting a squeeze on everybody. And then coming back to the West, what was the second part of your question again?
Yeah, like when are they going to really? When do you see the stock market rolling over? I mean, it makes new
Oh,
all-time
right.
highs every week, and it's like, okay, at some point they got to pull the rug. And I think we're in an 18-year secular bull market in stocks since 2008. It feels toppy here. I mean, but again, they control it all. They could probably make it go higher for several more years if they wanted to. But do you see them pulling the rug at some point and seeing a 2008 type of scenario again, where the market just collapses in a very short period of time?
I think the sovereign debt market might pull the plug for them. We'll have to see how that plays out, but I watch government bond yields pretty closely. And what I've noticed for a lot of, in the US as well as in Europe, in the EU, a lot of these government bonds are hitting yields not seen since the great financial crisis or the Eurozone debt crisis. Obviously, Japan's in a whole class of its own. Their bond yields are going parabolic compared to what they traditionally have been, which is close to zero, because the Bank of Japan has been, buying government debt hand over fist there to control rates.
Yeah.
And they've lost control. They lost control, I believe, in 21 or 22 when bond yields started rising sharply there. So we get an effect where as government bond yields rise, and if we do see them rise even more significantly from here, because let's be frank, what the US 30 years at 5 point something percent, which a lot of analysts are pointing to as kind of a danger zone. But I think you have to ask yourself the question, if you were to park your capital in the United States for 30 years, given their debt and deficit situation, given their reckless government spending, the level of blatant political corruption, I don't think 5% is anywhere close to the yield you're looking for. So if we see kind of a return to reality, for one thing, that's going to suck a lot of liquidity out of the stock market, because people are going to say, why am I going to be in the S&P that has been, in this massive bull market, as you mentioned? And so expected future returns are nowhere near what expected returns were before. Maybe I could get 6-7%, but if bonds start going up past that level, then we're going to see an exodus of capital from the stock market into government debt as well. So that could put a lot of downward pressure on things. So I think the bond market is worth watching. Yeah. And I think by all metrics, the broad market is overvalued. Cyclically adjusted PE, the Buffett indicator, price to sales, price to book. Yeah. It's getting ridiculous out there. Yeah. But you're right in that the market can remain irrational longer than we can remain. Throw in your favorite value investor quote about the market keeps going up and it shouldn't. That's kind of where we're at right now. So I would not be deploying capital into, the S&P or any of the broad indices or these big tech stocks. But on the other hand, I sure wouldn't be shorting them, because the graveyard is full of investors who thought they've caught the top, and there's no way these things can keep going up from here. And there's so much government interference, like you said, right? Like the US government taking a stake in Intel. What's to stop them from doing that with Nvidia, with Meta, and that could just end up being a big driver behind these equities continuing to go higher. So I would urge caution, but it could go higher for much longer than people realize.
For sure. So I believe we're in the beginning stages, maybe middle stages of, I believe, the biggest commodities bull market that we're ever going to see in our lifetime. So I'm personally 100% all in commodities at this point. I'm going to throw I have some crypto as well. I'm going to throw that in the commodity sector for now. But are you 100% commodities as well? And because I know a lot of people are not. They don't even have 10% of their portfolio into commodities. Kind of give me your 2-minute elevator speech on why commodities is the place to be right now, and why they should be taking a position, whether it's in the stock market or owning the physical metal.
Yeah, so my portfolio is 90% commodities, and the remainder is emerging markets. Okay. And I believe that we're in an upcycle for emerging markets as well. Okay. So that's a place that bears watching, in my opinion. The rest is all commodities. I'm very heavily weighted towards uranium, oil and gas, and uranium, oil and gas, and gold and silver equities. And the reason why I tend to agree with you on the generational opportunity being presented is because of underinvestment in the sector leading up until now, when it comes to the mining space in particular, low capex. When it comes to the oil and gas space, before things really took off, we'll probably start to see, if we see these elevated oil prices, we're probably going to see more new wells being drilled, more supply coming online. But for the most part, they've been very disciplined with allocating capital, the big oil and gas producers. They've been paying down debt. They've been buying back shares. They've been paying dividends. And so that's the type of scenario I'm looking for, where companies are generating a lot of free cash. And we're starting to see that now, as we were talking about with the gold miners, huge amounts of free cash flow. And then I want to see the companies that are using that free cash flow responsibly, given the current environment. But all of that being said, simply years of underinvestment in the sector, a kind of belief that we were moving away from a world of oil and gas and towards renewable energy, and we're moving away from mining somehow. People got this in their head, not realizing that civilization around us is all created by extracting things from the ground.
Mm,
And so I think that's coming front and center, particularly with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and the
right.
war in Iran. I think some people are going, whoa, I didn't realize commodities were this important. As you see the price of gas rocket up at the pump, as you see now the cost of getting on a plane and going somewhere has increased dramatically. And I think we'll start to see more of that inflation in food products as we see a lot of the urea and these fertilizer inputs being taken offline, natural gas going offline,
Right.
the Ras Laffan gas fields obviously getting damaged, that shutting down Qatar Energy, shutting down a lot of their energy production, natural gas production and transport. And so I think we're at kind of a tipping point now where these geopolitical uncertainties have revealed, firstly, how fragile supply chains are, but secondly, just how little supply there is of a lot of these different commodities. And not only that, but input costs into commodities. I think a lot of the sulfuric acid in the world is being taken offline by this closure. And that is a key input into mining activities as well, particularly copper mining. We saw copper hit all-time highs not too long ago. And energy security. This is another huge theme. I
Mm,
think countries, governments are starting to wake up to the fact that you can't be reliant on other countries to produce your energy for you. You have to establish energy sovereignty. Now, in some of these countries, I think it's suicidal and on purpose. I think in many EU countries, for example, I think the EU is just an Orwellian, anti-human organization that is seeking to suppress and kill many, many of its citizens. And so I think that they are fine and, in fact, moving towards energy scarcity in many of those places. But the countries that are actually, there's a bare minimum you need to maintain to begin with. And then the countries that are taking it seriously are realizing, we need our own energy sovereignty. And that's why I think nuclear and uranium is so attractive, because you can store nuclear fuel. You don't need much space to store centuries worth of nuclear fuel in your own jurisdiction. And these nuclear power plants can operate for a very long time. So I think uranium will be a big beneficiary of what's going on. But in short, years of underinvestment, markets are cyclical. And I think we have started to enter, and that's already starting to bear out, an upcycle in the commodity sector that could be, like you said, the biggest we'll ever see in our lifetimes.
Now, with the war, like you mentioned, is this how do you think this is going to go on for quite some time? And where do you see the price of oil heading to in the short and long term? And what are the effects that it's going to have on all markets? I mean, where do you see this playing out with the impact on the war and what it's going to have over the coming months?
I think the war, it's so difficult to tell because there's just so much information coming out so rapidly. But the pattern that has emerged so far seems to make me believe that it could be a years long event, perhaps on again, off again. Sometimes perhaps Israel will get in there and make some strikes, and Trump will pretend like he didn't know about it, as we've already seen.
Oh, one more question.
Um,
And what is the main
yeah,
reason you think the U.S. and Israel want this war? Like, what do you think the end goal is for this war?
I think it's probably to just continue to establish U.S. hegemony. I think they have concerns over China's development and advancement. I think a big part of this is to cut off energy flows from China. We know China is a big buyer of energy from that part of the world. Also, they've transacted in renminbi for energy, which I think the U.S. really doesn't like, because the petrodollar system is one of the main components that gives them power over the world. So I think part of it is about maintaining U.S. supremacy globally. I think for Israel is just a convenient ally in that they would like to dominate the Middle East, and bring to fruition the Greater Israel project, take more land in that region, and establish a bigger empire. And so for the U.S., obviously a very strong ally, of course, We don't know how deep it goes, but we do know that the Israeli government and regime has a huge influence on politicians in the United States. We know about all the AIPAC money that is coming in to support certain candidates. We saw a tremendous amount of money being spent to make sure that Thomas Massey didn't get elected in his jurisdiction. And it's an unfortunate, this is why I say the political system needs to be torn down completely. Because
Right.
if you have a system where people can just donate money, that doesn't make any sense. That's not a democracy.
Right.
Because to even stand a chance of being elected for many, many positions in government, and certainly those at the higher level, you need a certain amount of capital that is promised to you through the donor class. And of course, the donor class have their demands in exchange for that capital to finance your campaign. So that there's no possible way to move forward with that system. And we've already seen Israel has taken control of a lot of that. So how much, depending on who you talk to,
Sure.
some people say Israel is 100% driving this. It's just, Trump and many of his cabinet and just people in general at high level officials in the United States are compromised through blackmail. People point to Epstein, etc. And so they're completely controlled, a combination of blackmail and large inflows of AIPAC money and these big Israeli donors controlling them. People like Brian Berletich believe that actually U.S. is running the show and Israel is a vassal state, and they conveniently use the narrative of, oh, Israel's controlling everything to kind of give themselves a way out morally, I guess, at the end of the day, or to put the impression out there that, well, if it only wasn't for those Israelis, we would be a free country. So it's so difficult because so much gets obscured by the fog of war. But I think for Israel, it's about the greater Israel project. I think for the United States, it's about maintaining hegemony over the globe. And it's an interesting scenario. I just think it's going to go on for longer than people expect it to. And so I do see oil at $200 at some point. I mean, nobody knows when exactly. I'm not going to call a time frame for that. But I would urge caution when it comes to investing in the energy space, simply because we've seen the volatility. We've seen how a single tweet can send prices crashing. And we don't know whether peace is actually, we could be in a situation, there's some reports that the United States is in a desperate position and they're currently looking for a way out, but to be able to call it a win so that they don't lose face. So let's see. It'll be very interesting to see how things develop. If they full on start to attack Iran again, large strikes on energy infrastructure, bridges and stuff like that, aside from being international laws out the window, by the way. War, there's no such thing as a war crime anymore. I just hope people understand that. That's over. There's no more war crimes. It's whatever it takes. And if we see that sort of full on conflict again, then I would be, unfortunately bullish oil. It would be good for my portfolio, but not very good for humanity at this point.
For sure. No, that was very well said, Jesse. I mean, I could talk to you all day. I value your time, and I know you got to get going. But I just love talking to you. I could do this. I would love to do this again with you. I think your insight is fantastic. Some of the best I've heard, and I really appreciate all that you do on commodity culture. And I just want to say thank you for being a guest on the Gold Awakening today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Was happy to be here, and definitely want to get you back on commodity culture as well.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Jesse. Hope you have a great day.
Thank you.